Emily Carter never imagined her marriage would reach a point where silence spoke louder than love. She and David had been together for 12 years, a couple everyone admired. They lived in a quiet Portland neighborhood, surrounded by trees and laughter from nearby families. On the outside, they looked perfect: stable jobs, a lovely daughter named Lily, and a cozy home filled with framed memories. But behind the closed doors, something was changing, something Emily didn't know how to fix. It began gradually. David's late nights at the office became routine. The excuses, meetings, deadlines, client dinners were always the same, and Emily believed him every time. But she couldn't ignore how distant he had become. Their morning conversations shrank into a few polite words about bills and errands. Even when they were together, he seemed elsewhere, lost in thoughts she wasn't a part of. Emily tried to dismiss it. Marriage had its seasons, she told herself. Maybe this was just one of them, a rough patch that would pass. Yet the more she tried to bridge the gap, the wider it grew. The spark that once felt effortless now seemed buried under years of routine and responsibility at work. Emily was different, focused, respected, and confident. She worked as a creative consultant at a design firm downtown. It was there that she met Ethan Blake. He was new, a project manager from Seattle with an easy smile and a calm voice that carried warmth. From the first day, he stood out, not just because of his ideas, but because he listened. When most people interrupted or hurried through conversations, Ethan paid attention. He asked about her opinions, her designs, her thoughts. It was simple, but it made her feel noticed. Their friendship began naturally. They shared the same office coffee breaks, laughed about deadlines, and exchanged stories about life outside work. Emily mentioned her daughter. Ethan mentioned his love for travel and photography. There was nothing romantic at first, just comfort. But comfort can be dangerous when it begins to fill an empty space at home. As weeks turned into months, Emily realized she was looking forward to work more than usual. She caught herself glancing at the clock, anticipating their next chat. Ethan's presence felt easy, light, a reminder of what connection used to feel like. He wasn't flirtatious or forward. He was genuine. One day, during lunch, he told her, "You talk about everyone else with so much care, but you never talk about yourself." Why's that? The question lingered in her mind long after she went home. That night, as she watched David fall asleep with his phone still in his hand, she wondered when she had stopped being seen. Still, Emily didn't want to give up on her marriage. She loved David, not just the man he was, but the years they'd built together. They'd weathered storms before, and she believed they could again. So she tried. She planned dinners, left him sweet notes, even bought tickets for a weekend getaway. But each time, something came up. Work emergencies, canceled plans, last-minute excuses. She felt herself fading from his world. One quiet evening at dinner, when he didn't even notice her new haircut, the loneliness became heavy. And that's when Ethan's small kindnesses began to mean too much. When he brought her coffee on stressful mornings, when he stayed late to help her finish a presentation, when he remembered the little details she mentioned once and never repeated, it all mattered. It wasn't about romance. It was about being seen, being heard. One rainy evening after work, the power went out in the office. Everyone left early except Ethan and Emily, who stayed to finish a client proposal. They sat near the window, light flickering from the street outside, the sound of rain soft and constant. It wasn't silence that filled the room, but a strange understanding. A shared quiet between two people who didn't need to speak to feel connected. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You know, sometimes people stay where they're comfortable, even when it stops feeling right," he said gently. Emily looked at him, unsure how to respond. The words hit deeper than he probably intended. She felt her throat tighten. "And sometimes," she whispered, "they stay because they don't know how to leave." Their eyes met for a long second, one that said more than either of them could afford to admit. Then Ethan looked away, clearing his throat, returning to the work in front of them. The moment passed, but the air between them had changed forever. That night, Emily drove home in silence. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. She wasn't angry, she was scared. Scared of how easy it was to feel drawn to someone who wasn't her husband. Scared of what that said about her? When she reached home, David was asleep on the couch, the TV still on. She stood there staring at him, at the man she had chosen, the father of her child, and she felt both love and distance at once. The next morning she tried to act normal. She made breakfast, packed Lily's lunch, and smiled when David rushed out the door with his usual, "I'll call you later." But that call never came. Over the next few weeks, things between her and David only grew colder. He was buried in work, and she was buried in confusion. Ethan tried to keep their friendship light, but the unspoken emotions between them lingered like an invisible thread neither could cut. Then one afternoon, during a team lunch, Ethan mentioned that he had been offered a new position in Chicago. "I haven't decided yet," he said, looking at her briefly. Emily forced a smile, pretending to be happy for him, but her heart sank. She realized she had started to depend on his presence more than she should have. That evening, after everyone left, Ethan stopped by her office. "If I take the job, I'll be gone next month," he said softly. She nodded, unable to find the right words. The silence stretched between them. Then Ethan added, "You're one of the few people I'll actually miss here." It was a simple line, but it hit her deeply. She wanted to say something back, something honest, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just smiled faintly and said, "You'll do great, Ethan." When he left, Emily sat at her desk long after the lights went out. She knew she was standing at a crossroads she didn't ask for. She hadn't done anything wrong, not technically, but emotionally she was already lost somewhere between loyalty and longing. That weekend, she and David attended a friend's anniversary party. Watching the couple renew their vows stirred something inside her. As she listened to them talk about forgiveness, second chances, and growing together through time, Emily felt a sudden ache in her chest. She glanced at David beside her, polite, distant, unaware, and wondered when love had turned into habit. That night she lay awake, her thoughts spinning. She didn't want to destroy her marriage, but she couldn't ignore how deeply she had begun to drift away. She thought about Ethan, about the feeling of being understood, and guilt consumed her. The next morning she opened a blank page in her journal and began to write. Not to confess to anyone else, just to herself. "I don't know when it happened," she wrote, "but I feel like a stranger in my own life. I miss being seen. I miss feeling like I matter." She closed the journal, hid it under a pile of books, and went about her day. But deep down she knew the truth. She was standing on the edge of something that could change everything, and as much as she wanted to pull back, fate was already writing the next chapter. David wasn't supposed to be home that early. The office had a sudden power outage, and he decided to surprise Emily with dinner. When he stepped into the kitchen, the quietness of the house greeted him. He placed the takeout bags on the counter and looked around. Lily was at a friend's house, and Emily wasn't back from work yet. He smiled faintly, imagining her walking through the door to the smell of food. But as he set the table, his eyes caught something resting near the edge, a small, leather-bound journal. He didn't mean to open it, but the page was already slightly folded, and the words written there pulled his eyes before he could stop himself. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, neat, careful, but shaky in places. He read just one line at first. "I miss being seen. I miss feeling like I matter." The words hit him harder than he expected. He froze, rereading them as if hoping he'd misunderstood. Then came another line. "I feel like a stranger in my own life." His chest tightened. For the first time in months, maybe years, David realized how far apart they'd grown. When Emily came home, she saw him sitting at the table, the journal closed in front of him. The silence between them was heavy. "You read it?" she said quietly, not even asking. David looked up, guilt in his eyes. "I didn't mean to." "It was open." He paused, struggling for words. "Is this really how you feel?" Emily stood frozen by the doorway, her bag still hanging from her shoulder. She wanted to be angry, but she couldn't. She sighed, setting her bag down. "I didn't write it for you to read. I just needed somewhere to put what I couldn't say out loud." He looked at her for a long time, his expression a mix of hurt and confusion. "Then why didn't you tell me? I thought we were okay." She shook her head gently. No, David, we've been pretending we're okay. There's a difference. The honesty in her voice cut through the air like glass. David didn't know what to say. For years, he had been buried in work, trying to secure their future, believing he was doing the right thing. But somewhere in that process, he had stopped being present. I know I've been distant, he said quietly. I thought I was doing all this for us. For you, for Lily, I didn't realize I was losing you in the process. Emily's eyes softened. I know you were trying. But I was lonely, David. Not just alone, lonely with you right there beside me. He reached across the table, hesitating before taking her hand. Is there someone else? The question hung in the air like thunder. Emily's heart raced. No, she said quickly. There's no one else. She wasn't lying, not physically. But emotionally. That was harder to answer. David nodded slowly, as if convincing himself to believe her. Then let's fix this. Tell me what to do. But repairing something broken wasn't as simple as saying sorry. Emily didn't even know where to start. I don't know if we can just fix it, she whispered. It's not one thing, David, it's everything that's built up. The next few days passed in uneasy silence. They were polite, overly so, careful not to say the wrong thing. It felt like walking on glass. Emily wanted to find her way back to him. But she couldn't force feelings that had grown faint. Meanwhile, Ethan's upcoming departure was looming. The thought of him leaving stirred a strange ache inside her, one she didn't fully understand or want to. She tried to avoid him at work, keeping their interactions short and professional. But on his last week, he stopped by her office one final time. I wanted to say goodbye in person, he said softly. It's been great working with you, Emily. You've made this place feel like home. She smiled, keeping her tone steady. You'll do amazing in Chicago. They're lucky to have you. There was a pause, the kind that holds more meaning than words. Then Ethan said, take care of yourself, okay? You deserve to be happy. Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. You too, Ethan. When he left, she sat in silence for a long time, staring at the empty space he'd occupied. She wasn't in love with him, not really. But he had reminded her of something she'd forgotten, what it felt like to be valued. That evening, she came home to find David cooking dinner. The smell of pasta and garlic filled the kitchen, and for a brief moment it felt like old times. You're cooking? She asked, surprised. He smiled awkwardly. Trying to. I figured I've been gone enough lately. I should be here for once. Wasn't perfect, the sauce was too thick, and he burned the bread, but it made Emily laugh for the first time in weeks. That laughter, small as it was, broke the tension. They ate together, talked about Lily, and even shared memories from their early years. For a few moments, it felt like the distance between them might shrink after all. But later that night, as Emily cleaned the dishes, David said something that made her pause. You know, I've been thinking, maybe we should take a trip. It's just us. No phones, no work, no distractions. She looked at him, surprised. You really mean that? He nodded. Yeah, I don't want to lose us, Em. I've already been gone too long. For the first time in a long while, she saw sincerity in his eyes. The man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. She smiled faintly. Okay, she said. Let's try. Over the next week, David put in the effort she'd been craving for years. He came home early, helped around the house, and actually listened when she spoke. He even took an interest in her work. Emily wanted to believe it would last, that maybe this was their turning point. But deep down she couldn't ignore the fear that it was temporary, a reaction to guilt rather than change. One Friday night, as they packed for their weekend trip, Emily received a message from Ethan. It was short and simple. Boarding now. Just wanted to say goodbye one last time. Thank you for everything. She read it twice before putting her phone away. She didn't reply, but something inside her stirred. A quiet goodbye, not just to him, but to a version of herself that had been lost. The trip started well. They drove to a cabin near Lake Tahoe, surrounded by tall pines and quiet water. The air was crisp, and for the first time in months, they felt at peace. They cooked together, laughed, and watched the sun set over the lake. It almost felt like healing. But on the second night, as they sat by the fire, David brought up the journal again. "I keep thinking about what you wrote," he said softly. "You said you felt unseen. I don't understand how I missed that." Emily looked at the fire, her voice calm but firm. "Because you weren't looking. You were chasing something else. Success, security, maybe your own fears. I was right here, David." He took a deep breath. "I don't want to lose you, Em. But if there's something else you need, if you found something I can't give you, I'd rather know." Her eyes met his. "There's no one else," she said again, this time more sure of it. "But there was a part of me that felt alive for the first time in years, and that scared me." David nodded slowly, absorbing her honesty. "Then let's start over," he said. "Not as who we were, but as who we are now." The sincerity in his tone caught her off guard. Maybe, just maybe, this trip was the beginning of something new. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt hope flicker again, as they sat together in the quiet cabin. Listening to the wind outside, Emily thought of the word forgiveness. It wasn't easy, and it didn't erase the pain. But maybe it was the only way forward. And yet, deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part of their story was still ahead. The weekend at the cabin had felt like a fragile truce, a small bridge over deep waters. Emily and David drove home in quiet comfort, the air between them softer than it had been in months. But when they reached their doorstep, a single white envelope was waiting in the mailbox. It was simple, no return address, just her name written in neat, familiar handwriting. Emily froze when she saw it. She didn't need to guess who it was from. Ethan. David noticed her hesitation. "Who's it from?" he asked casually. "Just work mail," she said quickly, sliding the envelope into her bag before he could see it. He didn't think twice, turning to unload their luggage. But Emily's heart was already racing. That night, long after David had fallen asleep, she sat alone in the living room. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the fireplace. Her fingers trembled as she opened the letter. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Emily, I hope you're doing well. I didn't mean to stir up any confusion in your life. I just wanted to say thank you, not for what happened, but for reminding me that connection still exists in a world full of noise. You once said you felt invisible. I hope you never feel that way again. Take care, Ethan." The letter was short but heavy with unspoken meaning. Emily read it twice, then folded it carefully. There was nothing romantic in his words. Yet they carried the weight of what almost was and what she knew could never be. The next morning, she tucked the letter into a drawer, deciding to let it go. She didn't reply, but part of her felt strangely lighter. It was as if the universe had given her a choice to keep holding on to the past or finally release it. Days turned into weeks. Life seemed to return to routine. David was making more effort than ever before. He came home early, asked about her day, and they even started taking walks together after dinner. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt him trying, really trying. One evening, while walking through the park, he said something that made her stop. "I've been offered a position in Seattle. It's a promotion, but it means more travel again. Before, I would have said yes right away. But now, I don't want to lose what we're rebuilding." Emily looked at him, touched. "Then don't," she said softly. "We've both given too much time to everything but us." He nodded. "I turned it down this morning." That simple confession meant more to her than any grand gesture ever could. For the first time in years, she saw the man she'd married, not the one buried in spreadsheets and deadlines, but the one who used to stay up with her all night, talking about dreams. Slowly, the distance between them began to fade. There were still awkward moments, small reminders of how far apart they'd drifted. But they were learning to be patient with each other again. Still, deep down, Emily knew rebuilding trust wasn't easy. She hadn't done anything wrong. Not technically, but she had walked dangerously close to a line. And part of her wondered if David sensed that. One night while cleaning her drawer, she found the letter again. She stared at it for a long moment, then took it outside. Standing under the pale moonlight, she lit it with a match. The paper curled and blackened, the words disappearing into smoke. It wasn't out of guilt, it was closure. Inside the house, David saw her through the window and stepped outside. "What are you doing?" She turned, smiling softly. "Letting go." He didn't ask what she meant. He just walked up, wrapped his arm around her, and they stood there in silence, watching the ashes drift into the night. In the weeks that followed, they found small ways to rediscover each other. Weekend breakfasts, movie nights, even simple things like holding hands while driving. It wasn't perfect, nothing was, but it was real. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. Lily came home early from a friend's house, holding her phone with a worried expression. "Mom, is everything okay between you and Dad?" Emily froze. "Of course. Why do you ask?" Lily hesitated. I heard you guys fighting a lot before. I thought maybe—" Emily's heart ached. She knelt down, taking her daughter's hands. "We're okay, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups lose their way for a little while, but we're finding it again." David joined them, resting a hand on Lily's shoulder. "We love each other and we love you. That's not going to change." Lily smiled, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt warm again, not because everything was perfect, but because it was honest. As months passed, life quietly settled. Emily noticed that her heart no longer raced at the thought of Ethan. Instead, when she thought of love, she thought of home, imperfect, messy, but deeply hers. One afternoon, while sorting old photos, she found a picture of her and David from their early years, both younger, smiling at something unseen. She stared at it for a long time, realizing how far they'd come. They hadn't just survived the storm, they'd rebuilt from it. That evening when David came home, she handed him the photo. "We should take another one like this someday," she said. He smiled, looking at the picture. "How about tonight?" They laughed, took a selfie in their kitchen. No filters, no poses, just them. It wasn't picture perfect, but it felt real. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, David spoke quietly. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't stopped to fix things?" Emily nodded. "All the time. But maybe we had to break a little to learn what really mattered." He looked at her, his expression full of gratitude and love. "I don't ever want to lose you again." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then don't." For the first time in a long time, Emily felt peace. Not because everything had gone back to how it was, but because she'd chosen the life she truly wanted. The affair that almost ended everything had instead become the turning point that saved it. But fate had one last quiet test. Months later, as autumn arrived, Emily received an invitation to a work conference in Chicago. Her heart skipped a beat when she read the location, but she smiled. Life had a sense of humor sometimes. When she told David, he simply said, "You should go." "You've earned it." She went, not with fear or guilt, but with clarity. On the last day of the conference, while walking by the river, she thought about the past, the loneliness, the near mistakes, the forgiveness. It all felt like a different lifetime. The city lights reflected in the water. And for the first time, she didn't feel haunted by memories. She felt grateful for the lessons, the pain, and the love that had survived both. That evening, she called David. "I was just thinking about you," she said. "Were you now?" he teased. "I was just missing you here." Lily made dinner, but it's edible at best. She laughed, feeling warmth spread through her. "Tell her I'll fix it when I get home." When she returned 2 days later, David met her at the airport. He wrapped her in a hug that felt like coming home after a long journey. No words were needed. Everything they'd been through, the distance, the heartbreak, the almost loss, had led them here. Stronger, wiser, together. That night, Emily stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The world outside seemed unchanged, but inside, everything was different. Sometimes love didn't look like fairy tales or grand gestures. Sometimes it was the quiet choice to stay, to rebuild, to forgive. Emily knew she'd once stood on the edge of losing everything. Her marriage, her peace, herself. But in walking back from that edge, she had found not just love again, but herself. And as she watched David sleeping beside her, she whispered softly to the night, "We made it."